Welcome, everyone, to the Score Fantasy Football Podcast presented by Subway. I'm your host, Justin Boone, the lead fantasy analyst at The Score. Joining me today is The Score's David P. Woods, a man who lost to my team in an epic game of Whirly Ball about 2 years ago, I think it was. If you aren't familiar with Whirly Ball, don't worry about it because we weren't at the time either. It's sort of a combination of bumper cars, scoop ball, and basketball. I think that's probably the simplest
lacrosse,
way.
like you score by throwing the ball with like some sort of lacrosse stick or something.
Yeah,
it's a very weird. You're driving around in a bumper car.
Yeah. It's a very strange game. My team was at a 5-on-4 disadvantage, and yet we still pulled out the win against Woods' team.
I can't believe you remember that. This was a game with the Score's whole NFL staff, and if I remember correctly, there was some very suspect officiating in that matchup from about a 15-year-old referee.
I'm not saying I didn't pay off the refs or anything like that. I don't know, Anyway, it was really fun. I don't know why that we haven't gone back and done that again, actually. We were all like very impressed at how fun that was. But on today's show, I'm going to give a quick glimpse at some updates that you're going to see in my rankings that are coming out on Thursday. Then we're going to go over week 3, and we're going to preview it with our guest today, Pat Daugherty, also known as Pat from Rotoworld. And we're going to pick his brain about the biggest questions that are facing fantasy owners entering this third game of the season. Before we get to all that, though, if you like what you're hearing, make sure that you are subscribing to the podcast. That's the easiest way to get the podcast as soon as possible on your mobile device. And once you do, give us a rating, give us a review. There's a bunch in there already, and we really, really appreciate it. So like I mentioned, my latest rankings will be available on The Score on Thursday. Let's take a look first at some of the notable risers and fallers that you're going to see in our next level update segment, which is presented by our friends at Subway, who upped the taste ante with their new next level paninis. I'm moving Kirk Cousins up a couple spots, and the matchup is just so good. He's at home against the Bills. They've allowed 6 passing touchdowns through the first 2 games, 3 each by Joe Flacco and Phillip Rivers. The only fear I have here is that the Vikings are going to be up big in that game, and maybe Cousins is going to get taken out early, but I wouldn't be surprised if he has 3 touchdowns by halftime in this one. Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs, Kyle Rudolph, even Laquan Treadwell caught a touchdown last week, so big day coming for Cousins. He's up to QB5. Tevin Coleman also on the rise. I have him at RB6. Coleman's delivered whenever he's been given starter snaps, and despite the team's claim that Devonta Freeman is day-to-day, I'd be shocked if he played this week. Most injury experts see him out for another week or 2. That's what I think is probably going to happen. Honestly, though, this move also had something to do with the guys who are around Coleman in that range. Kareem Hunt gets the 49ers, who are more susceptible to the pass, I think, and we've seen what Mahomes can do. And Saquon Barkley faces the Texans. Both of those teams have had pretty strong run performances this year and haven't given up a rushing touchdown yet. So I have more faith in Coleman than those two, so I gave him the bump up. And the last player I'm going to talk about in this segment is Isaiah Crowell. Hopefully you do not have to lean on Crowell this week. He did have a big game in week 1. I have him falling several spots here, though. The more I looked at this game, I actually like the Browns defense. And it's hard to say this, but I think that they're going to win this one. So game script-wise, that means less for Crowell, more for Bilal Powell. So Crowell down to RB32 for me there. If you want to see the rest of my rankings, as I mentioned, they're going to be up on The Score on Thursday. You can see them all there, every position, standard formats, PPR as well. Our guest today is an excellent fantasy ranker himself. It's Pat Daugherty, also known as Pat, like I said, and that's his handle on Twitter if you're looking for him there. Pat is one of the funniest analysts, I would say, on Twitter. I think you'd agree with me there, Woods.
Oh, yeah, he's great, yeah.
Probably the highest compliment that you can give to someone. I actually laugh out loud at some of your tweets, Pat. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for the immediate flattery. It's a very nice way to start any podcast hit. You're too kind. And I was going to say, you guys are just great football analysts. The podcast got off to I don't even know if Whirly Ball is a Canadian sport, but I say it got off to a very Canadian start.
Yeah, I don't know if it's Canadian or if it's all. I think it's just not that popular.
It can't be taken over the world
everywhere.
We did it like 5 years ago, so it hasn't taken over the world in the interim.
Well, maybe after we talk about it today, it's going to blow up.
It's just a nondescript North American sport. Let's put it that way.
It was surprisingly fun, though. It was so fun. I would recommend it to anybody out there. Go find a Whirly Ball court if there is one near you. All right, so let's get into week 3. And I think the best place to start here is with Carson Wentz. He's going to make his season debut. He's finally back. By all accounts, he's healthy. Unfortunately, the rest of his offense isn't, though. Alshon Jeffrey and Jay Ajayi probably going to be out in this one. Mike Wallace just broke his leg. So what impact do you think Carson Wentz's return is going to have on that offense, Pat? And are you looking to buy any of the Eagles right now, or do you maybe have some reservations about Wentz coming off that injury?
It's clearly going to be a big impact. Nick Foles, after inexplicably turning into Brett Favre for the 2 biggest games of the 2017 NFL season, pretty Folesian. Very Folesian in the preseason, pretty Folesian in week 1. Had a better week 2. But you broke it down with so many concerns of the weapons, and Carson Wentz from a guy who just got cleared for contact 2 days ago, and running was such a big part. Running, scrambling, such a huge part of his breakout season last year. And I think you'll see a guy get off to kind of a slow start. Maybe never the most accurate guy. Maybe as he's kind of finding his legs, maybe even the kind of a sub 60% passer the first few games this season. And like you said, it's just it's not like they have 0 weapons, but just not. Last year he had a ridiculous year with not on paper the most impressive supporting cast. So it's not like that's a huge hindrance for him. But I think there's so many question marks, so many kind of signs saying to just kind of ease into the fantasy season with Carson Wentz. So I'm kind of treating him as a QB2 right off the bat, and not really targeting anyone in this offense for trade in fantasy, because it's just such a confusing situation. The entire calculus will change as soon as Alshon Jeffrey's back. Can Nelson Aguilar keep getting 10 to 12 targets a game, So just kind of a situation. It's a cop-out answer, but I'm just kind of trying to avoid for now, really.
It makes sense. I am willing, and it always depends on the price, but I am willing actually to buy Wentz in this situation. Although I would like to buy him and give it a week just to make sure that he's healthy. I held him in one deep league, just waiting on it. I normally don't do that. I normally don't carry 2 quarterbacks because I don't like wasting the roster spot early in the season. But I think Wentz has the upside that I was willing to wait on it. He's got that MVP-like ceiling. We saw it from him last year before he got hurt. And the price he was going for in drafts near the end there, you get him in the 10th, 11th round in some places. So that was the one spot where I grabbed him. I saw him out in the waiver wire in a couple of leagues, though, and if that was the case...
I have too. I saw him going drafted in a few late drafts.
Yeah, so if that was the case, I think he is worth throwing on there. We saw it, like you mentioned. Nick Foles just didn't do much in those first 2 weeks there, and I think Wentz is going to remind fantasy owners pretty soon just how good he was last year. So, and it's a pretty good matchup right out of the gate against the Colts there, so we'll see. It is possible that he could step right in. I don't think in a year where we've seen guys like Ryan Fitzpatrick blow up, I don't think anyone would be shocked to see Wentz come out and play well right off the start there.
Yeah, no, it would mean, like I said, I kind of gave all the reasons for pause. You gave all the very valid reasons for optimism, and it would certainly not be surprising to see a guy who would have won the MVP last year if he hadn't gotten hurt, kind of, if not pick up right where he left off, close to it. I'm taking the slightly more pessimistic view, but your view is completely valid and could very easily be right.
He's just going to have to do it with maybe Jordan Matthews back and Kamar Aiken, and he still has Ertz, he still has Aguilar. That's more than enough. I
was really, really hoping for Mac Hollins' season this year, so I was very, very disappointed when he landed on injured reserve.
I agree. Yeah, he flashed a little bit early in the preseason last year, and it seemed like maybe he had a future ahead of him. So it's unfortunate that he wasn't there. Let's go from one injured QB just coming back to another. So Wentz is healthy. Aaron Rodgers likely won't be the rest of this season. It doesn't seem like it. He's trying to play through that knee injury. He was okay last week. It was also against a very tough Vikings D. So, Pat, how do you think that injury is going to affect not just Rodgers, but also his pass catchers moving forward, including this week on the road in Washington?
I just said, I was kind of like, gave reasons for caution with Carson Wentz's knee injury. I'm going to immediately contradict myself with Aaron Rodgers and say I don't think it'll have an extremely large effect. Maybe instead of being top 2-3 every week, he'll be more top 5-6 in fantasy. We saw the movement was certainly impaired by the Vikings, maybe a little less than I was expecting. But the arm strength was certainly not impaired. And Rodgers, famous for making his plays on the move, kind of scrambling out of the pocket, but was also just deadly in the pocket. Can make can make any throw basically from anywhere behind the line of scrimmage. And I think he's a guy who's going to figure it out. And it's an injury that will supposedly maybe get a little better, but it could be like a Russell Wilson 2016 type situation. Like you said, he's never close to 100% healthy, but he's someone I have faith that he will figure it out. He will get his QB1 numbers. The weapons, so far, he's kind of doing the Aaron Rodgers thing. He's been supporting 3 receivers so far. Geronimo Allison's kind of one of the more kind of like underappreciated players in fantasy right now. And so maybe like you just lower the ceiling like ever so slightly, but yeah, I have a hard time seeing him falling out of the top 5 to 6, which might be a disappointment for some people if Aaron Rodgers is quote unquote only a top 5 or 6 quarterback. But if he falls, I think it's like half a tier basically like that.
And you nailed it. That's exactly where I have him this week at QB6 right now. And I think you do have to take a little bit off. Just he's not going to be running. It's hard to judge when that first matchup was against the Vikings there. That first matchup
it would
coming
have
off
been better.
the injury.
Yeah, like it was basically like talk about like an incomplete or like a not available for the grade basically.
Exactly. Yeah, I think Adams is going to be fine. I think the only thing we might see, and you nailed it, he's kept all those guys viable. I think the only thing we might see is maybe more of a rotation of big games coming from like Jimmy Graham and Randall Cobb and Geronimo Allison. Maybe we won't see games where he's, supporting all 4 of them. Maybe it'll just be, 2 of them every week kind of thing. I think that's it, though. I think he's still going to be fine. It's very difficult to bet against Rodgers, so you got to keep him in that mid-range QB1 level. Sticking on that offense, I will say right off the bat here, this is a pro Aaron Jones podcast. I will let you know that. So I think Woods maybe has a little bit of reservation that they're going to play Jamal Williams more just because of his past pro and with Aaron Rodgers hurt there. But as far as Aaron Jones goes here, what's your outlook for him? Do you think that he's going to get in there immediately after the 2-game suspension? I know Mike McCarthy said he was today that he was going to run behind the other 2. Do you think it's only a matter of time? Are you like us, or do you maybe have some reservations about him as well?
Well, yeah. So you said this is a pro Aaron Jones podcast. I think you'd be very hard pressed to find like an anti Aaron Jones fantasy football podcast. Very much, including at Rotoworld, we've been all aboard the Aaron Jones train for a while, and right now he's definitely one of those guys that is still more beloved by the fantasy community than his own coaching staff, which can be a problem. But Jamal Williams hardly slammed the door shut these past 2 weeks, and we all think Aaron Jones. I think we all know Aaron Jones is a more explosive player, and maybe with a physically limited quarterback, you might need to search for more big plays out of the backfield. So I take Mike McCarthy at his word that he probably will be the number 3 back this week, not someone I'm looking to use in season long or a daily fantasy this week. But Aaron Jones should absolutely still be rostered across the board, and like you don't have to like really stretch to kind of make the case for his upside. Like you don't have to strain to make that case. So it could be a slow start, but someone I'm still excited to have on my bench in fantasy.
And I was kind of surprised when I wrote the waiver wire article this week on Monday. He was 61% owned in Yahoo leagues. Today that's up to 64%. That's still not enough though. He should be owned everywhere. You nailed it. Have him on your bench. Don't play him this week. Don't get crazy. But let's see how this turns out. We just know when a player has fantasy RB1 upside, they should be on a roster. If they're a handcuff or if they're a player like Jones, that you can see that clear path for him to get that job if it works out his way. And I talked before the season about what could happen with this running game, and they had 2 very difficult matchups to start the season. I've brought it up before, and Jamal Williams did exactly what we expect. He's just sort of a pedestrian talent. He's going to get what's blocked. Not much more than that. Jones is explosive, though. He definitely can. Woods, you agree here?
Yeah, I think maybe Jones just needs a chance to flash what he can do and show that he's just so much more explosive than Williams. And I agree. I don't think you want to start him this week, but you look ahead 1 week beyond that to week 4, and the Packers are playing the Bills. That's a team that we've seen backups produce big time against so far this season. That may be an opportunity where the Packers get up in that game to start running Jones, and Jones really gets some tape down for his coaches to see, and maybe they finally do flip things a little bit moving beyond that and put more on his plate.
Another player that knows a thing or two about suspensions here, we got to talk about him, Josh Gordon. He fits the same kind of bill. Woods, we haven't talked about it on the podcast yet. We recorded Sunday night before it all went down. He's on the Pats. God. As a Bills fan, it's just, I hate seeing this. But once again, the Pats get stronger. Is he a player, Pat, that you want to acquire? Is he a guy that you want? Or are you looking maybe to sell him at this point when he's in the news this much?
He's the kind of guy where I feel like his trade market is so incoherent that I'm just gonna completely sit it out, because everyone values him like so wildly differently. So like if you don't have him, whatever, just mind your own business, keep your head down. If you do have him, which I do in several leagues, I mean, you got to see it out. I'd rather to see what he can do on the Patriots in the next 2 or 3 weeks than like gamble on trying to get like a low end wide receiver 2 from someone or something. I mean, the upside is self-evident, and I think that's just the only word I can really think of when I think of Josh Gordon's trade market is incoherent. So if you don't have him, you don't need another problem in your life. If you do have him, to see where the upside leads you, basically, is the way I would approach it.
And it's funny how these things can go. I made a trade last Thursday before any of this happened. I traded Gordon away. I got Alex Collins.
I'm going to cut you off. I just want to say, because like this is like the definition of something that escalated quickly. Because like I was just thinking of like Josh Gordon last Thursday, and like I was like you. I was just like so happy. Like, I'm going to use Josh Gordon this week. And it really escalated quickly. I'm not sure if that was worth interrupting your train of thought to weigh in with that.
It's all good.
But, yeah.
It's all good. No, I was thinking at the time, I wasn't totally sure that he was going to reach the levels that maybe we hoped. And I saw an opportunity to get Alex Collins, who I still value as an RB2. So I traded Gordon away. I got Collins right before the Thursday nighter last week. And it was 2 days later, it came out that the Browns were releasing him. I was accused of everything in the book that I knew this was going to happen, even though, all this went down Friday and Saturday. And then look what happens. A couple days after that, he ends up on the Patriots, and now that owner might have a pretty good asset on his hands. The thing, I wrote a trade column today, a buy-sell column, and on one side of it, I mentioned Aaron Jones as a guy that I still would like to go out and get. On the other side, I put Gordon in there as a sell. I know it's weird to me that everyone just kind of assumes that these reclamation projects are going to work in New England, and we've seen it happen before, and Belichick probably offers the best chance for Gordon to reach his potential, but it's also possible he just ends up being a bit player in that offense, and he could have some games and go off, but he's going to have to compete with Gronk and Edelman when he's back, and I still don't think Chris Hogan's going to be completely out of the picture there. It's also possible that he struggles to grasp this offense. We've seen that happen, especially with receivers before, trying to get on the same page. And receivers in general going to a new team middle of the season can sometimes be difficult. So if you can get a good offer for him, I'm happy to move on.
Yeah, sell Josh Gordon. I would sell Josh Gordon. Sorry to interrupt. I think, Boone, you hit on most things. I mean, this is just what the Patriots do. They go out and get these reclamation guys. I mean, here are some they've done recently. Philip Dorsett, Cordell Patterson, Eric Decker, Jordan Matthews, Corey Coleman. They just went and got a Brown a few weeks ago and cut him. It usually doesn't work out. It's worth a shot for the Patriots. They usually give up almost nothing to do it. Now, Gordon's maybe one level beyond that. But like you said, it's hard to learn an offense when you're a receiver joining a team midseason. It's potentially going to be very hard for Josh Gordon to fit the Patriots because he's just not necessarily the type of route runner that they look for, like a very steady, reliable route runner. He's more of an explosive flash guy. I'm not really worried about his fit in the locker room. I think that's sort of an overblown thing. The Patriot way doesn't necessarily mean you can't be sort of a unique guy off the field. And the Patriots just sort of have this allure that causes guys to sort of fall in line. But I think right now I'd be looking around my league, trying to find an owner who thinks Josh Gordon is the next Randy Moss and selling as high as possible, because I just think still the chances that he hits wide receiver 1 value are so much lower than even the chance that he catches a couple passes and they cut him in a few weeks.
So
yeah, you guys laid it all out perfectly. I was going to just build on a point both of you made. We're like, we kind of all guessed that the Patriots were going to be the team to get Josh Gordon, and like rightfully so. Because the Patriots, we know they give these second chances, but as you guys both kind of said, they're famous for giving these second chances. But like they should be equally famous for, ending the second chance the second it's not going the way they want it to. So they will absolutely. I mean, obviously, none of us would be surprised if Josh Gordon was basically a free agent in 3 weeks. So the upside, very high, but the odds of hitting it, as you said, probably very low. So
I think you have to at least test the waters.
Maybe I'm all on sell now on Josh Gordon.
Yeah,
I think you guys convinced me. I've got him in 2 or 3 leagues. I'm going to try to trade him after the podcast.
I mean, aim really high with your trade offers. See what's out there. Test the waters in your league. If you are an owner who loves Josh Gordon, aim really, really high and just see if someone's willing to bite. I don't think it hurts to just find out what the market is for him. Like Pat said, like it's very volatile. Some leagues are going to value him much different than others. I think you should at least find out where he's valued in your league if you own him.
All right, absolutely enough Patriots talk. That is enough. I'm so sick of hearing about how great they are. Last week on the podcast, we had JJ Zacharyson on, and I mentioned the fact, and I promise I'm not just going to talk about trades that I have made in leagues all day long. It's not what we do here, but we mentioned with JJ last week that he had offered me Ryan Fitzpatrick in a Superflex Dynasty league that we're in together. I'm a Jameis Winston owner. In the offseason, I turned him down. I didn't need that. Ryan Fitzpatrick for a couple games to start the season. How foolish. I've started off 0-2 in that league, and I can let everybody know that the other night, JJ and I did in fact make the Ryan Fitzpatrick trade. I had no choice, but part of the reason is I'm not so sure that Jameis is just going to get that job back now. I think it's a non-zero chance at this point that Fitzpatrick continues to be the starter. Do you think that the Fitz magic is here to stay in Tampa? I guess more specifically, do you think he can keep this offense humming on Monday Night Football against the Steelers, who we just saw get lit up by Patrick Mahomes? If he does that, I mean, the job's going to be his, at least for the foreseeable future. Do you agree, Pat?
Yeah, I mean, I want to believe so bad in the Fitz magic, but we've seen this happen before. We've never seen it happen to this degree, I will say. And he's probably never had this talented of supporting cast. Like the matchup too. I mean, my inclination is still to bet against Ryan Fitzpatrick, but you're talking about a Steelers defense that has allowed, I believe, the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks. It's mostly because Patrick Mahomes lit them up for 6 touchdowns, of course. But defense that didn't look the same after they lost Ryan Shazier last year hasn't really looked the same without Joe Hayden early this year. So another very rippable matchup. And I think I agree with you. Kind of, even unless he completely face plants Monday, I think he actually probably will keep the job for week 4 at least on a short week. They'll be playing Monday Night Football, and the Bucs they've been saying since the summer that Ryan Fitzpatrick could keep the job, and they've rightfully so lost faith in Jameis Winston, not necessarily for his football, but because the very troubling pattern of off the field behavior. And they're kind of like at a crossroads moment as a franchise. And, they know Ryan Fitzpatrick's not going to be their quarterback of the future, but maybe they've decided they don't want Jameis Winston to be their quarterback of the future and are going to be content to ride this out with Ryan Fitzpatrick as long as it goes. So my guess would be he's under center for week 4. Beyond, I'm really not willing to make a bet on that, but I think he will start in week 4, and it's definitely a non-0% chance he will start beyond week 4.
But it's also a non-0% chance, like you kind of alluded to, that he's going to go out and throw 4 picks in this game, and I'm going to feel like an idiot for making that trade. It's also possible. Everything's on the table.
He's someone who's, in general, usually had to pay the piper. So, we'll see.
Fitzpatrick's a great example of how the fantasy landscape can change at the start of a season. We kind of have to adapt to some new ideas. Is there anything, maybe whether you want to talk about a star or just a team in general, that you've changed your mind on early in the season after seeing what they've done?
I'm gonna have to change my mind on David Johnson. I think. We knew it was a new coaching staff. We knew Bruce Arians was gone. The guy who featured Johnson so creatively in 2016. He had the most yards from scrimmage in 2016 of any player over the past 3 years. And so I knew it was a new coaching staff, obviously, but over the offseason, they were kind of still talking about maybe David Johnson is someone who could go 1,000, have 1,000-yard receiving in addition to 1,000 yards rushing, but he's been running so much fewer routes. We knew it wasn't a talented offense, but the supporting cast around him maybe even less talented than we thought. So it's hard. No one has discouraged me more through 2 weeks than David Johnson. If there is any light at the end of the tunnel, Steve Wilkes said this week basically that they've got to start using him the way they used him in late 2015, 2016. So maybe they finally gotten the message. But David Johnson, is not someone I'm going to drop out of the top 12 or anything like that. But he's someone who I think should be in contention for the number 1 running back each week, and you just can't. You can't realistically see that right now. So David Johnson, who's the person I think over the first 2 weeks I've sadly changed my opinion on the most.
I'll jump in with one here too, but I I thought the Steelers would have players who wanted to be on that team. I mean, call me crazy, but Le'Veon Bell hasn't shown up. Now we have Antonio Brown skipping practice. I mean, I think he's back there today. That situation might smooth out, but I'm a little worried about the Steelers there. I just think that it just seems like it's one of those combustible teams that we just talked about. Ryan Fitzpatrick, if he goes out and shreds them this week, and Brown doesn't catch the passes again, he's a little upset. Bell's still nowhere to be seen. That's an offense that I can see going south. I don't think it's imminent, but you can start to see the warning signs there. So
you certainly felt better vibes from other teams than you have from the 2018 Steelers. That is for sure.
Absolutely. For this one, I'm going to go with Allen Robinson, actually. I'm going to go at it from a positive perspective, though. You guys both went a little negative there. I think with Robinson, I wasn't totally sure. We knew he had the potential to be a wide receiver, too, in fantasy. I just wasn't sure that he was going to see the targets. Wasn't really around in the preseason. And coming into the season, I really thought they were going to spread the ball around. I had high hopes for Trey Burton, high hopes for Anthony Miller, too. Those guys just aren't seeing very many targets. It's surprising, but they're using Robinson out of the slot. They're moving him around. It's great to see for him. It also seems like Trubisky's just completely locked onto him. He had 14 targets in week 2. If he's getting that kind of usage, he's going to be a rock solid wide receiver too. And I can admit I was a little low on him in the preseason. On the flip side of that, are there any teams, Pat, that you just don't want any part of at all? And maybe your answer is going to be the exact same, and it's going to be the Cardinals. But are there any teams where you just don't want to touch those offenses?
I mean, there's no one. I think none of us would ever never say never with any offense necessarily. I've been
not even with the Bills. Not even with the Bills this year.
Yeah, well, maybe the Bills, but I've been the most discouraged with the Giants. Of course, I'm not gonna. There's too many talented players in that offense to fade the Giants' offense wholesale in fantasy. But I mean, it was just kind of pathetic, really, what we saw from Eli Manning in week 2. And but if I was gonna say I don't want to start any player from this offense, I'd maybe go with the Tennessee Titans at this point without Delaney Walker out. I mean, with Delaney Walker out, it was such a shaky summer for Marcus Mariota. For the 4th time in as many NFL seasons, he's already hurt. The very unpredictable running back rotation. Maybe it's not unpredictable. I mean, Deion Lewis is going to benefit whenever they're playing from behind, which looks like it's going to be quite often. And Corey Davis, he didn't sit out already listed with a hamstring again last week. There's kind of everything going wrong for the Titans offense so far. And again, I'm going to start Tennessee Titans, of course, but just that might be the offense I'm least enthused about beyond the obvious answers right now, like those poor Buffalo Bills.
At least I think for the Titans, though, with the new coordinator and they've had those injuries, I think there could at least be some hope that they're going to get it together. There are some talented players there. I think they could gel over time. I think when you're talking about, for me,
absolutely,
the Bills, obviously, we were talking about that before the season. They're too obvious to even bring up, probably. It's a no-go there, especially with the new stuff about McCoy. And the Cardinals, you talked about them in the last one, but you're still owning David Johnson. If you have him and you can't trade him away, you're still trotting him out there. But expectations for him have to be reduced. Fitzgerald's already banged up. There's just not a lot of weapons there, unless you think that Rosen's going to come in and just really lift that whole offense, which I don't really think is the case. But Woods, you have one?
I mean, I think if Rosen was going to come in, it probably would have happened this week. So the fact that they haven't made that move, it leads me to be very pessimistic that it's going to happen this season. No, I think you guys covered it. I'm on the same teams, just trying to stay away from those ones.
Well, let's take a look at some of the struggling committees, or at least the committees that fantasy owners are struggling to figure out here. Talking about teams like the Lions, the Seahawks, the Colts, the 49ers, the Titans, who you just mentioned, the Jets. There's a bunch of them. Is there any hope, Pat, for fantasy owners to find value in some of these struggling situations?
I really, I'm a fantasy analyst. I wish I had a good way to spin this one, but I really don't. I mean, I'm just gonna have the obvious answer. I just target the guy with the most upside in every backfield, and if you have to play him this week, just give yourself some reason for optimism this week. The guy with the highest upside, long term. Committees eventually are won. Committees, they're getting bigger in the NFL. They're much more common than they used to be. But each committee still is a guy you want to own. I mean, the Lions will probably want to own Kerryon Johnson. The Seahawks, I guess I still want to own Chris Carson. I don't quite understand why every time Pete Carroll opens his mouth, it's to praise Chris Carson, and then 2 games in a row goes away from Chris Carson.
You just can't believe anything he says.
Yeah, no, you really cannot. The Colts, I have legitimately no idea. You can make like kind of an intriguing case for almost every one of those backs. Just kind of, you're on your own there. The 49ers, I guess I'll go with the guy who can catch passes, and Matt Breida. Titans, I go with the guy when they're playing from behind, Deion Lewis. The Jets is another one. It's just kind of like thoughts and prayers if you're trying to figure it out. Like you this week, they might be playing from behind, might have some negative game script, Bilal Powell. But so just in general, target the youngest back, target the back with this like it's a way it's like a time where you can like embrace unknowns. Like we don't know what Kerryon Johnson's upside is, so just bet on him. We already know what LeGarrette Blount's upside is. We already know what Theo Riddick's upside is. So bet on the guy who like hasn't already established a hard ceiling, and that's kind of the way I approach these sprawling committees.
Yeah, it seems like you nailed it there.
I want to bring up another committee that I think we didn't really expect to be a committee, which is in Denver, where Royce Freeman splitting carries with Phillip Lindsay in sort of a surprising way, where Lindsay is the one leading that backfield by a little bit. I mean, I think I'm still investing in Freeman there just because I believe his pedigree. I mean, he's the 230-pound guy who was a workhorse in college. He was a third-round pick in the NFL. Lindsay's a late-round guy. He's a small guy. I don't think he can hold up to it. But now that I have you guys both here, like who do you want to target in that backfield going forward?
Pat, you want to take this one first?
At least for now. I mean, we got a hot hand backfield, and Phillip Lindsay's gotten the hot hand both weeks. And Broncos another team that have a lot of negative game script. And Phillip Lindsay catches passes. Royce Freeman doesn't really catch passes. And I agree that I certainly don't see Royce Freeman like disappearing off the face of the fantasy earth or whatever. But it's very hard to ignore what Phillip Lindsay has done so far, and maybe just the more undersized, but maybe just the more versatile back, and maybe that's who I'm leaning towards in fantasy right now.
I agree. I have them both ranked as in the RB3 range, with Lindsay being, the better option, I think, at this point. There's going to be weeks where those two flip. The weird thing to me is that Booker's still getting snaps. What are they doing? Just completely push him off to the side. He's getting snaps. He's not getting many touches, but he's getting snaps. And we gave them credit for at least turning to the other two and giving them more work. But they need to go the whole way here, get rid of Booker completely, and let those snaps go to the guys that are actually producing. And hopefully they do that eventually here. One team that has answered all the preseason hype is the Rams. Got an interesting matchup this week, LA against LA. The Rams defense has been dominant through 2 games. Part of that might be the opponents, but they've looked really, really good. This is going to be the toughest offense that they've faced, though, with Phillip Rivers and the Chargers. Are you trusting everyone from the Chargers side in this one, or are you going to start to shy away from teams going up against the Rams?
I wouldn't trust everyone, but kind of like I will never log off online. Kind of like I will never log off. Phillip Rivers will never stop throwing. He will just never ever stop throwing. So I still like Phillip Rivers as kind of a mid-range QB2. I mean, even if you're like somehow already in a real pinch, he's a guy who could easily, anytime Phillip Rivers takes the field, he can have a QB one day. And I'm gonna fade the peripheral guys this week probably. Mike Williams, Tyrell Williams, you're kind of just hoping for a random touchdown. Austin Eckler actually may be a guy who I would still give flex consideration. We saw the Raiders give the Rams kind of fits targeting their running backs in week 1. So maybe, and that's something obviously the Chargers are doing heavily in both their games. So you can maybe expect still a lot of passing game targets from Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler. So I'm not, it's looking like a foreboding defense on the Rams, but I'm not like all hands off deck this week with the Chargers.
And it's funny, one of the reasons I bring it up is because last week we talked about going up against the Bills. It was basically play all your Chargers. What a contrast going from the Bills last week. Now they're having to play the Rams. Going to be a much different opponent. Let's wrap it up here with a player, or maybe a couple players if you want, that you think fantasy owners might be overlooking in week 3.
The guy who came to mind for me is Sony Michel. He kind of heavily involved for as little as he practiced this summer. He was kind of heavily involved in week 2, and Rex Burkhead didn't play in the second or third quarter last week against the Jaguars. He's been banged up for weeks, still seems to be banged up. And I think the Patriots are already ready for Sony Michel to kind of take the lead on early downs. The Lions' run defense has been very soft through the first 2 weeks, and maybe I'm not ready to call Sony Michel like a locked-in RB2 this week, but I think he's kind of already on the borderline of RB2, RB3, and I think people are just kind of sleep. We kind of psych ourselves out the Patriots' backfield, but I think people are sleeping on Sony Michel this week.
And yeah, not just this week, but for that Patriots offense, they got some nice matchups coming up. They have the Lions this week, Miami, Indy. It's looking pretty good after a couple tougher matchups to start the season. Woods, who's your guy this week?
I mean, it was tough for me to find one. I went up and down your rankings trying to find someone I thought everybody's overlooking. I think maybe Blake Bortles is one that stood out to me. I think if you're a Carson Wentz owner who doesn't have Ryan Fitzpatrick on your team to start this week and you want to bench Wentz for one more week, maybe you look at Bortles here. I mean, he's playing the Titans. We just talked about them. They're kind of a mess. They can't really rush the passer. They signed Malcolm Butler to fix their pass defense. Butler's getting shredded so far this season. Been targeted 17 times in the first 2 weeks. He's given up over 250 yards, 3 touchdowns. Both of those stats are the worst in the league. TJ Yeldon's banged up now. Leonard Fournette's probably still hobbled. Maybe he plays, but I don't think they're going to lean on him as a workhorse. Maybe Blake Bortles just throws it a bunch again. I mean, he threw 4 touchdowns and 377 yards in week 2. Maybe we see a similar performance this week. I mean, Bortles is also a weirdly good rusher, something I sort of watched him in week 2 and was surprised. He can really move. I think it's possible he shreds the Titans this week and maybe worth a spot start.
He's one of those guys that if you just show Bortles stats and not his name, like his fantasy finishes, he's had really good fantasy finishes most years, people would be all over him. Guy just threw 4 touchdowns last week, and yet you still just feel dirty picking him up and playing him. It's a tough one. For me, one guy, Latavius Murray. Dalvin Cook left in overtime last week with a hamstring injury. He called it cramps after the game. He said he was fine. We've seen players do that before. We're going to have to watch practice participation here. But even if Cook is out there going up against the Bills, we just mentioned the Chargers last week. We advised play everyone. I think if Cook got a little banged up last week, maybe they just lean on Murray in this one. And we've seen what he can do. He did it last year. Could be a big game for him. Another guy, too, Calvin Ridley. Could be a high-scoring game with the Saints. Ridley's starting to come on. He had 4 catches, 64 yards, had a touchdown last week. He's kind of starting to challenge Mohamed Sanu for that second job there. Hopefully people read my waiver wire column and went and grabbed him. But if you didn't, he's a sneaky flex play out there. All right, that's all we got, Pat. A big thanks for coming on. Make sure you're following Pat on Twitter, at RotoPat. And checking out all his content over at Rotoworld. We really appreciate you coming on, man.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Anything for Canada, who I was going to say my second favorite country. Maybe I should say it's my favorite country. No, yeah, it's not to keep playing up the Canadian thing. You guys are a great site, lots of great content. You're one of the best rankers in the industry. So you've been patting my back. I will pat your back. Elite ranker, Justin Boone. So yeah, my pleasure to come on.
One final reminder, if you're liking what you're hearing, hit that subscribe button. A lot of good stuff coming. A lot of big names like Pat on the podcast every week. They're going to give you incredible insight to help you set your lineups. Woods and I are going to be back Sunday night, as always, breaking down all the action from week 3. And as always, we're going to run through an early look at the waiver wire, get you a head start on all your opponents. If you want to get in touch with Woods, at David P. Woods on Twitter. Make sure you're checking the Score app for my fantasy content, including my rankings on there. They can help make most of those lineup decisions. If not, you can always ask me questions on Twitter, at Justin Boone, and we will see you next time.
Said leave on time, my baby said leave